Welcome back. You're watching a special edition of ET Insight. It's been a long journey for India from being a poor nation a few decades ago to an emerging powerhouse. Earlier we told you why India needs to dispel the mood of gloom and doom, speed up decision making to boost investor confidence and push through policy reforms to woo foreign investors. Let's now address why we need to remove hurdles in the energy and power sector, bring in much needed reforms in agriculture and rebuild India's cities and towns.
It's the dawn of a new era, a time when the winds of change are blowing in India's favor. But to have the winning edge, India needs to quite literally energize its economy. And the way to start is by addressing the acute shortage of power.
There are several areas which are just not controversial, which are crying out for fixing. If you take why is there's so much wastage or diversion of electricity? Why can't, with the technology that the world has today, this be addressed?
According to industry, the demand-supply gap in the power sector could range between 12 and 18%, though the official CEA estimates peg it at 10.3%. The heart of the problem is that nearly two-thirds of India's power production is based on thermal fuel, including crude oil, natural gas, imported coke, and most importantly, coal. Industry experts peg India's coal shortage at 70 to 80 million tons, or 20% of total annual demand. According to the Planning Commission, additional coal production in India was just 37 million tons last year, even though 208 captive coal blocks with 49 billion tons of reserves and a production potential of 657 million tons per annum were allotted. The shortage in supply and rising coal prices are making power generation unviable.
The prices of coal internationally have gone, have more than doubled. In fact, maybe around 3 times the prices ruling 3-4 years ago. So obviously all their projections have gone haywire.
What's also fueling the power prices is the acute shortage of crude oil and gas. India imports nearly 76% of the oil and 19% of the gas it consumes. And the government bears the largest burden in terms of cost because of fuel subsidies. While petrol prices have been deregulated in the past few years, diesel, kerosene and LPG, which jointly account for 80% of total fuel demand, are still subsidized. To lower this burden, the country needs to reduce its dependence on crude imports. And the only way to do that is by exploring and discovering new sources of energy. The NELP, or the New Exploration Licensing Policy of 2001, was supposed to help India expand its exploration capabilities, but that's not happened. According to the Planning Commission, so far 235 blocks have been awarded, but the results have been unsatisfactory for 2 reasons. One, India's energy giant ONGC has been unable to raise its production levels, and 2, the international response to exploration has been very poor.
I think that program has failed miserably. We have not discovered any large quantities of crude, despite having NELP 1 and NELP 14 or whatever the last one. So we have to get our act together on it. There has to be massive amount of investments in exploration.
Next in line is the agricultural sector, which is both India's pride and shame. 60% of the country's population is directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture. Yet the poor farmer gets just 33 rupees for every 100 rupees spent by the consumer. Compare that with the global average of 66 and you will know why the Indian farmer still has a long way to go.
We haven't seen a major thrust into second generation agricultural reforms. The productivity has stalled. We haven't applied enough technology. We haven't put together enough logistics pieces together to save our wastages. So I think time has come to really put minds together to do whatever possible.
The biggest problem with agriculture today is poor infrastructure and the dominance of middlemen in the supply chain. Picture this. 40% of India's agricultural produce is wasted or lost in transit. A huge loss considering that the sector contributes to almost 1/5 of the nation's GDP and accounts for about 10% of its export earnings. The biggest reason why India needs to tackle this problem right now is the stubbornly high food inflation, which has taken a toll on interest rates and growth.
Apart from, let us say, prevention of movement of agricultural produce and so on, subsidies which distort the whole mechanism. I'm not for a moment suggesting that well thought out subsidies should be removed, not at all. Subsidies should be directed in such a way that they then do not distort the system.
One way to address these issues is by improving food processing in the country. India produces nearly 50 million tons of fruits and 90 million tons of vegetables annually, but just 2% of that is processed. That's abysmal, especially when compared with 23% in China, 78% in the Philippines and 83% in Malaysia. India needs to move fast on this because rising affluence in rural and urban India has led to a change in consumption patterns and habitation. Which brings us to the next area in focus, urban development, which has not kept pace with India's rising urban population, particularly in cities and towns. That in turn has made real estate prices hit the roof and led to the increase in slums. And it's only going to get worse in the years ahead. The Planning Commission has stated that India will face a shortage of 26.53 million houses by 2012. And the Ministry of Urban Development has estimated that India needs to spend nearly 50 lakh crore rupees on its urban infrastructure over the next 2 decades. But money will come in only if the rules and regulations are more transparent and streamlined.
Basically, government should quicken the process of permissions for real estate. Shouldn't have this 20 permissions, 30 permissions, depending on the state you are in. There should be single window, preferably no window. Just lay down the rules and say you just go ahead. And FSI needs to be increased tremendously across the country.
According to the government, India's urban population of 300 million people will double over the next 2 decades. And cities with a population of 1 million plus will more than double from the current 35 to 87.
Dr. C.K. Prahlad had said that India needs 50 new cities. So I subscribe to that actually, and these cities must be planned such that it reduces the commute times. You need to look at new designs, new zoning for these cities so that they are smarter, they are better.
According to a report by consulting firm McKinsey, cities will account for nearly 70% of India's GDP by 2030. And the country will have to build between 700 million and 900 million square meters of residential and commercial space, equivalent to 2 Mumbais or 1 Chicago every year. The report states that India needs to build 350 to 400 kilometers of metros and subways every year. In addition, it needs 19,000 to 25,000 kilometers of road lanes to be built every year as well. These staggering numbers explain why urban development is the need of the hour.
Well, that's not all. There's plenty more India needs to do to buck the trend. But before we get to that story, we take a quick break. Don't go away.